Šta se dešava sa Europskom unijom? Da li je europska civilizacija na zalasku? Može li se Europa vratiti svojim pravim vrijednostima? Sve su to pitanja o kojima ću razgovarati sa Davidom Engelsom. On je belgijski istoričar i filozof, predavač na nekoliko europskih univerziteta i autor knjige Braniti Europu kao civilizaciju. Mr. Engels, welcome and thank you for your time.
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm already looking forward to our discussion.
Sure. So, are we witnessing basically the downfall of Europe?
Perhaps not yet the downfall, but it is sure that the European civilization as such is in a deep decline, a decline that is essentially an identity and culture question. It's not so much about economy and institutions and politics than it is about identity. I think that most of the big problems Europe is facing are coming from the inside. Of course, on the outside we have the competition with China, we have the uneasy relation, to say the least, with Russia. We have the relation with the US, which is also very quickly changing. But essentially, we have inner problems. We have problems like the demographic problems. We have mass immigration. We have multiculturalism. We have the decline of traditional Christianity. We have globalization. We have social polarization. And all these problems, they are basically homemade. And I would say that these problems that are homemade, they are the sign of a long-term civilizational crisis that is, by the way, quite typical for many late civilizations. I once wrote an entire book on the analogies with the late Roman Republic in the 1st century BC, and that is also an explanation why it is not enough to have one or two new laws or programs or whatever, but we need a fundamental reassessment who we are and where we want to go.
Well, it is obvious that Europe is not really important as the other big players in the current global political affairs, but can we pinpoint or generalize who or what is responsible for the current state?
Responsible for the current state, I would say that all huge civilizations go through a certain life cycle. I'm strongly influenced by thinkers like Spengler, like Toynbee, partially also like Hegel or like Vico. And so for many, many centuries, historians and philosophers of history have put forward this idea that all great societies or civilizations go through a certain life cycle. And our life cycle is now, I would say, characterized by the apogee, the culmination of a certain refusal of transcendence and of wholeness and even of holiness that has started many centuries ago already. One could say, even though this might be an unpopular opinion, that the current wokeness is not an accident, but it is the ultimate consequence of a pseudo-humanist project that thinks that God or transcendence or religion or tradition can be left outside or at least relegated to a purely private affair, and that think that a durable, solid and prosperous society can be built only on purely reasonable and pseudo-humanistic decisions. And I think there's a fundamental error in that, this idea that homo mensura est, that man is the measure of all things, is, I think, a fundamental error, because truth, beauty, goodness are not things that are decided upon by majorities, where a parliament can decree today the truth is that and next week it's something different, and beauty and goodness are also elements that are not shifting but that are permanent. And only if we assume that these points are absolute, are transcendent and do not change, then we can build a society that can refer to these absolute values. But if, as is happening today, definition on what makes a man or a woman depends on a majority decision, then of course it's the open door to relativism, and relativism leads to cynicism and to nihilism, and in the end to some Darwinian battle where basically those powers control truth that dominate the media, and that is more or less where we are.
Can Europe go forward without its clear connection with the Christian tradition? It's based on Christian tradition. That's one of the pillars of Europe today. But it seems now that it is really very rarely even mentioned.
Yeah. I would say no. I often refer to the quite famous Böckenförde dictum, a paradox of a German specialist in juridical history, who once said that the modern state is based on pre-assumptions it cannot guarantee itself. So that is, the modern state functions and has functioned as long as there was some form of traditional Christian substrate that ensured that people basically behaved, respected their word, believed in something ulterior than just their inner interest. And if a society functions on such a pre-political, pre-modern basis, then it can construct something like a modern state. But this modern state cannot guarantee this Christian substrate. And the problem is that this Christian substrate has been eroding away for decades, if not for centuries. And today, especially in the west of Europe, we have arrived at a point where Christianity is basically extinct. You still have some more traditional Catholic groups here and there. You have some evangelical groups also over there. But I would say that the mainstream Catholic and Protestant churches, they are only touching a small fragment of people. And in themselves, unfortunately, they have taken also an evolution to a certain modernist approach of basic values. So Christianity, as it was once, is more or less extinct. And now the substrate is eroding away, is totally gone, and this is why we now have this moment in history where, with the substrate gone, all the other construction of modernity and of modern statecraft is just falling into a nothingness it has partly also created.
In the American Declaration of Independence, it says that the government is formed from the people, by the people, for the people. Who runs European Union now? Are those people actually worrying about the majority of European population? Are they doing to get their lives better, or are there some kind of elites, some deep state, woke ideologies? Who runs European Union now, in your opinion?
Yeah, that is of course a very complex question. I mean, when we look at the parliament, but the power of the parliament is of course very restricted. There we have some form of political, of democratic justification. The members of the European Parliament are elected in their constituencies, so we have democratic elements, but the parliament is quite powerless and is anyway dominated by a leftist majority. Then we have, of course, the European Court of Justice, but it is, as we all know, when it comes to its composition, it has a very strong bias to the left. And then, of course, we have the Commission, and normally the Commission is composed by people sent in from the member states, but as most of our member states are also leftist, and it is also partly about the Parliament to confirm the members of the Commission or to refuse them. This explains also why there is a bias. So I wouldn't go as far as many who would say the European Union has no democratic legitimacy. I think there are complex form of democratic legitimacy, but the problem is not as much the elites, or is not as much the structure and the legitimacy of the European Union, but rather the specific nature of the elites running the European Union. And these elites are basically the same than those who run the nation states. It's not a caste of people outside of the nation state. If you look at the current elite running France, or running Germany for that case, or running many other states, Spain, for example, basically it's the same group. It's the same group of people, and they are very clearly oriented to what you could call left, sometimes even woke. And so they are materialists, essentially. Some may believe, but in fact what they are doing is purely materialist. It is very submitted to a certain woke agenda that is very present in the media. And that explains, of course, that the European Union is for the moment being used as an instrument of the political left to basically repress the political rights and, of course, to restructure the European Union into something that the founding fathers had not wanted. The founding fathers of the European Union, like Robert Schuman or like Adenauer, for example, these people were staunch Christians. Schuman once explained that there cannot be a non-Christian democracy, that if Europe would have a democracy that is not based on Christianity, that it would sooner or later become anarchy or tyranny. So he saw that, and unfortunately, since then, since these last 50 or 60 years, there has been this shift towards the political left, and so this very interesting instrument that is the European Union is used in order to quell conservative governments, like in Poland, like in Hungary, like in Slovakia, and so forth, and also to impose a certain agenda, like mass migration, like LGBTQ and gender agenda, like a certain form of ultra-liberalism, like the climate change agenda. And so this instrument is used against its initial course. But for me, the problem is not necessarily the instrument, which could be very interesting, but rather the elites using that instrument, because these same elites within the nation states are doing the same. So that would mean that without the European Union, well, the German elites or the French elite would continue exactly the same thing, basically. So it's essentially not so much about a problem of the institutions, as many say, but rather a problem of a certain mindset of elites that are ruling Europe, or large parts of Europe, and that are using or misusing the European Union to further their aims.
It seems like they're pushing some policies that are not crucial for the benefit of the people. We talked earlier today, you said that they're spending more time on bottle caps than on providing strategic resources. Yeah. That it's a good illustration of how they are thinking. So does that need to be changed?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is, of course, an inherent problem in democracy itself. Let's be honest, in a complex world like today, with all the crises Europe is facing, being in charge even of a large nation state for 4 or 5 years doesn't give you any possibility to change anything. Most of the big reforms we would need to tackle, like migration, like demographic decline, like disindustrialization, all that would need large programs that are imposed for 10, for 20 years before any significant change could be seen. I mean, mass migration is something that has been building up for 50, 60 years. We cannot, with one law, change that in 5 years. That's not possible. The same is the case for the rest. And so very often reforms are very unpopular because you need to spend a lot of money and of effort now and for 5 years or for 10 years, and then in the end you will see that, okay, we now have first fruit of that. And every time, and a normal politician would of course say, well, why should I do any reform that would make me unpopular and make me lose my job, that would have another one be put in power, and that person would then reap the fruit and become very popular for something I did. And I think that is a big problem of democracy. It's also a problem then of the structures of the European Union, which are also very short-lived and which make it very difficult to have these long-term programs, even more so as such long-term programs would need an approval from the left and from the right at the same time. Yet these fundamental questions are deeply divided between both, so that it is really impossible to go out of that without a fundamental change. And that is why basically we are continuing the same errors and everything is becoming worse and worse. And one has to say also, there is a certain interest in all that. I mean, I'm not a conspirationist, but it's sure that if you fragment your own population so that they have a lot of enmities between themselves, then you can of course be sure also that you will never have a large majority against you, because you have all these groups and they don't think the same. So it's much easier to remain in power only remember about the Romans who said divide et
Divide and conquer, yeah.
So this is of course one thing that may explain mass migration. There is also this ambient anti-Christianity that is so typical for the political left. It's no secret. They don't like Christianity, obviously, as materialists. So, of course, Islam seems also like a good possibility of taking away the monopoly of Christianity on religious questions and also dividing. And, of course, things like the climate agenda may seem and are destructive for the middle class and large parts of the economy, but there are also many people who benefit a lot from them. There are many groups, even large investors, especially large monopolists, who benefit from that. I mean, look at Germany, for example. The fact that now people are imposed programs of isolating their houses in an extreme fashion leads to the fact that many people don't have the money to do that, that other people don't have the money also to rent these flats, and that basically big companies like BlackRock, for whom the Chancellor Friedrich Merz has worked, are now capable of buying large chunks of the real estate. So from a democratic nation-state point of view, many of these reforms may seem absurd, but on the other hand, there are people winning a lot of money from that and financing then such media, such NGOs, such politicians in order to further that. So it's not totally illogical. There is a certain, unfortunately, I would even say, perverse logic behind what is happening, which makes it so tragic.
In your opinion, is Europe in danger because of large influx of immigrants, mainly from Muslim countries? Let's face it, they are there to stay. Largely, they will be there for generations. So what needs to be done, and is European civilization as such in danger because of that?
Perhaps not in mortal danger immediately, but you are absolutely right. Many Muslim migrants and families are here for 3 generations. Many have the citizenships in France or in Belgium since the 1960s. They often intermarry, perhaps not so much with Europeans, but with other groups. So they are here. So, and unfortunately, the first generation still had a tendency to integrate into the framework of European civilization. Now, with the means of mass media, many of the young people, they listen probably more to Algerian television and preachers and so forth than their grandparents, who couldn't do that. They had to buy a journal at the counter, but they couldn't be in permanent contact with their home civilization. This has changed, and so at the same time, our civilization, the Western civilization, has become more and more dystopian. Very obviously, we live not only in a form of moral decadence, but also of economic decline and of total hedonism and materialism and nihilism. And so many young people who are looking for an answer, many young Muslims also, are confronted with this civilizational vacuum, and they don't want to become like that. And I can even understand them. So they think, okay, I don't want to become like these mainstream young Europeans who believe in nothing, so I will be a better Muslim. And so there is this form of radicalization that is a result of our intellect or of our moral vacuum. That is why the usual response, that is, we need even more laicity and secularism, is precisely the wrong answer to the problem. The more you construct a society that is devoid of cultural, civilizational, religious frameworks, the more groups like the Muslims will radicalize themselves because they do not want to be sucked into this void. Mm-hmm. So this is the wrong answer. So this is why the problem of Islam will rise. And of course, when we look at demographics and so on, it is clear that in one generation or so, the conditions in France will look like in the United Kingdom, where you have many towns with majorities of non-European inhabitants. And so they are there to stay, and there are no legal grounds also you could put forth to change that. You cannot just expulse someone whose family has lived here for 3 generations. It would not be profoundly unjust legally, but it would also be very difficult from a practical point of view. So the only answer is yeah, we need certainly some form of remigration of people who are illegally here, but that won't solve the majority of the problem. And this problem can only be solved by integration. And for making integration better, you need, again, a strong society into which these people can integrate. So our first step would rather be to recreate as much as possible a strong European mainstream society that knows what it stands for and that knows that it does not just stand for institutions, infrastructures, legal things like that, but also for a certain form of belief, for a certain tradition, for a certain assertion of this is how we do things here and not the other way around. And only if we again create a society with strong boundaries like that, then integration can be possible. But for the moment we are doing things the other way around, and it's leading to potentially to huge disasters.
Well, because of the migrant crisis, because of woke and LGBT policies, because of, in part, because of confrontation with Russia, we see political change in some EU countries, namely Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia. We see politicians who are conservative, who claim to be Christian-based, who are against those policies, and their voice is louder and louder. We also see that in so-called old European countries, like in France, in Germany, even Austria, Italy. Yeah. So is that a trend in European Union, in your opinion, and what happens next?
I think so. There is obviously a certain tendency to conservatism, to the political right in all countries. The problem is that the political right is still very fragmented in Europe. There are many signs of hope, but still 10 years ago, the German conservatives or right-wing or populist or however you will want them and to name them, or the French or the Italian or the Austrians, would barely speak with each other because they would have totally different opinions, and most of them would say anyway we want to go out of the European Union, so no need to collaborate, we just want to destroy the thing. That has changed, and that is changing. There is no serious European political conservative party that is for leaving the European Union anymore. They all say we need European cooperation, but we need to reform the European Union. So that has changed. And thanks to the European Union, because there are good things, many good things even in the European Union, the Parliament, the Commission and so on, they are ideal platforms for discussing. So and this is why more and more the people know each other. And the French conservatives and the German and the Polish and the Italian, they meet regularly, they see each other, they know how they look like. So they eat together, they drink a glass of wine in Brussels somehow. So they start to work together. And I think that is the only hope we have, because if we do not work together, then the power of the European Union and of course of the mass media and of the other countries can very quickly destroy conservative parties, like in Poland. What happened, for example, in Poland? The Poles crucially underestimated the need for working together with other European conservatives, for having a good international media impact, for doing good educational work and good cultural work with their young people. They underestimated all that. They lost power because of the sanctions. Viktor Orban has understood that he needs to work with the others to create sympathy, to create his own media, and that is also why he has a lot of success. And I think we need to insist on that and to work ever stronger together and to put our aim not on thinking just about our national interests, but rather about European civilization as a group of destiny that works together, that is living together for a millennium by now, that has always strong interactions, and whose interests or whose, let's say, who has more to win with working together than with being alone, especially in the context where we have the competition with China, where we have Russia, the US, mass migration. We all have much more to lose from being alone when confronted with all these problems than with working together, even if this means that, yeah, the German conservative cannot have 100% of his program. He needs to be okay. Well, the French sees it a bit different. We need to find a compromise. But only then, if we find this pan-European, conservative, patriotic compromise, can we hope to defend what is left of our civilization.
Let's take some time to talk about Balkans and the situation here. How do you see Serbian people in Europe? Are we, in your opinion, a part of the European civilization?
Yeah, most decidedly. I mean, of course, when you go to the fringe, so to say, the fringes of Europe, like the south of Spain, the south of Italy, the Balkans, the region somewhere in between Poland, Ukraine, Belarus. Of course, you have territories that are, I wouldn't say mixed, but where you see influences by other civilization coming in, like the Islamic, like the Russian, like the remainders of the Byzantine civilization. So it's less clear cut because identity is a bit more divided than for people living, so to say, in the middle of this civilization. But it is clear, in my belief, it is clear that the future, the long term of the Serbian people lies with Europe. Perhaps not, but that doesn't mean that I would say, okay, now you need to join the European Union. I know that for the moment, at least, the European Union, the Euro, the attempts to have their own military, to have the education system is something that I would not necessarily advise conservative parties or countries to embrace, because this could be very dangerous. But I think that on the long run, the future lies with working together with the neighbors. So I would strongly advise the Serbs perhaps not necessarily to join immediately the European Union, even though I personally would really like it to have Serbs in the parliament, because I think it is better if the voice of Serbia is heard in the European Parliament, in the middle of it, everything, than somewhere where it can be neglected, ignored, and not being heard. It's better if the Serbs would speak to the others than just being spoken about by the others. But I can understand if they won't join, for the moment at least, but I would strongly advocate them, even if they are outside of these structures, to join up with the other patriotic forces, to discuss with people believing also in the European civilization, in Christianity, in the value of the family, in a certain form of social economy, in the fact that we all have these same needs, and to discuss with people thinking like that in Romania, in Hungary, in Croatia, in Italy, in Germany, only by coordinating their approach and making their needs heard, but also realizing, okay, this is a point where I can't perhaps get my 100%, but this is something where the others will suddenly say, oh wow, we didn't know that you had this position. Only if they start to bring their voice into, can they also hope to gain sympathies and to one day to be fully integrated in what I hope will become a European civilization. Because the problem is remaining outside as a small state like Serbia makes Serbia extremely dependent on outer forces, on outer patrons like Russia or like China or like the US, for example.
Yes, but it's all a two-way street, so to speak. We believe as Serbs that we were, through history, always on the forefront of European defense, and we have paid a large and heavy price for that. But now, when it comes to Europe, all we get are some terms that we need to come. We get critics, and we also get targeted as those who are against European values, even though, for example, here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we are facing threats from Muslim extremism, political Islam, colonial management, and yet most of the time we get criticism from Europe.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's from that point of view, even though all situations are different, from that point of view, what I experienced in Poland was the same. I lived for 7 years in Poland. I worked indirectly for and with the Polish government, you could say. And I also saw that those people who are deeply European and who felt that Poland had an important role to play in Europe, that Poland had once saved also Western civilization from Islamic onslaught on Vienna and so forth, that these people were always called in the Western media as being Eurosceptic or anti-European, which was not the case, of being against European value because they defended Christian values, of being against the interests of women because they defended the family. So it's the same everywhere, basically. It's not only a question of even the countries, even parties in the middle of Europe that defend these points of views are marginalized, are vilified, are criticized. So what Serbia and the Republika Srpska is experiencing is something that most conservative Europeans can relate to. They may not have the same history, they may not be in the same situation of gravity or exclusion and civil war and so on. I don't want to banalize anything, but if you would share, for example, the experiences you related now with a French conservative, he would absolutely understand that point of view, and he would be happy to talk with you about all that and to realize that even in Serbia, that seems so far from a French perspective, basically we are fighting a very similar battle with, of course, national differences. We all have also slightly different interests, which is also why a future European Union should never be centralized but quite federal in its structure. But still, we all fight the same fight. And I think we are living now in a period where the European conservatives are starting to realize that basically we all fight the same fight, and thus that we have much more allies than we sometimes would think. And that is an advantage.
Could European Union actually prosper from getting, for example, Bosnia and Herzegovina as a member state? Let's draw a parallel between Belgium, your country, and Bosnia. They're approximately the same size. We have two elements that form the country, different peoples, different cultures, all live in the same country, organization. But we do have many problems. Would it be better for Europe to take Bosnia and Herzegovina as an example of multicultural country to be in that community, other than always providing us with some other terms that we need and basically blackmails that we need to meet?
I don't know enough about the current state of Bosnia-Herzegovina in order to say that this is an experiment that functions well. I'm not sure about that. From my impressions I gained here is that at least from the point of view of the Republika Srpska, there are some considerable problems when it comes to the constitution and the functioning of Bosnia-Herzegovina, knowing at the same time that there are not many alternatives to the thing that is there for the moment. I can relate to that, even though the history is totally different, of course, once again, from a Belgian perspective, because we are also living in a somewhat weird federal state with groups that live next to each other without speaking a lot with each other, where there are still some grudges and resentments, not in the same, of course, dimension like in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but still there is things. And this idea, this state is weird, this state is a bit dysfunctional, we don't really see an alternative, so we have to just to continue without being very happy about what we have, because what is missing, of course, is a common aim. I think that Belgium as a state has not anymore any common mission. There is not something where Flemish people and French-speaking people and German-speaking people, because there is a tiny German-speaking community also in Belgium, could say, okay, we as Belgians have this mission, or we have this Belgian perspective on something. And I think that Bosnia-Herzegovina probably is also in such a case that they wouldn't say, okay, we have a common mission like that as a people that would help us overcome our differences, because there is something higher apart from just surviving and having peace. that we want to achieve. And I think this is a problem that the European Union also has for the moment. The European Union too has not anymore any common goal, it hasn't any common mission. For many centuries Europe had a mission, especially the Holy Roman Empire was one of the major entities that gave Europe its mission as a Christian state, with an imperial mission that lay not in expansion but in imposing and guaranteeing a certain order of freedom inside and of defense to the outside. Today's Europe is just constructed about the negativity of we do not want any more war anymore, and on common economic reasons. And from the moment on, we see that this Europe is unable to ensure peace within Europe, and it is the case with Ukraine, and it was the case with the Yugoslavian war, where the European Union was not able to do much finally, and where also wealth is decreasing like it is doing now. Then the legitimacy of the European Union is eroding. So we need this common aim, and I sincerely hope, and that is why I wrote my book, and sincerely hope still that through democratic, organic means we might be able to develop and to construct such a Hesperialist Europe of the future that would again be based on its proper, true historic identity and its tradition and its belief in transcendence. But I have increasingly this fear that, exactly like with the situation we had on the Balkans, that the conflicts between not nations but between groups like migrant groups, like Islam, and especially political Islam and Islamism, like woke and like the conservatives, these three groups will probably not be able to sort it out on the long term on a peaceful way. And already in France we see this high risk of civil war, as Emmanuel Macron very often mentions it and announces it. And so there could be indeed some form of dangerous phase, perhaps not of civil war, but at least of civil unrest and endemic crisis in many parts of Europe, with some form of Bosnification of countries like France.
Another paradox regarding Bosnia and Herzegovina, you mentioned European institutions, you mentioned parliaments, European Commission and so forth. We here have an existence of a German diplomat called Christian Schmidt, who presents himself as High Representative. There is no UN Security Council resolution which appoints him, so Republika Srpska does not recognize him. However, he acts here in a way that he imposes laws only by decree, bypassing parliaments, even though the constitution of Bosnia and Herzegovina clearly states that laws are passed through parliaments. And so he imposes laws, and then by those laws elected politicians are later sent to courts. And what's ironic is that he gets support exactly from the European Union and from those countries like Germany and France.
Yeah.
Can that happen in any other European country?
It did happen. Think about Greece. Think about the Troika that was sent to Greece when we had this huge economic and the crisis of the euro, where basically Greece for many years was put under some form of provincial administration by a Troika going there and strongly advising the parliament to vote for this and that, with consequences behind. So,
but we can say that's a sort of a financial more than a although it is political problem. But here it's an attack on the constitution.
This is something that is becoming more and more common. I mean, it's more obvious in the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina because, well, the situation of this uneasy peace and having some form of representative over here. But I think it is relevant of something that is much deeper. That is the belief of many leftist woke elites that they know what is good, basically.
Best for us.
That is best for others, and that want to impose it upon them. And I mean, it's not the same thing. But think, for example, what happened before the election of Giorgia Meloni, when Ursula von der Leyen announced that in case the elections would end in a way she wouldn't appreciate, that the European Union would know what measures to take. It ended quite well because Meloni understood the message and is very
well. We also had elections in Romania, Moldova.
And then and then of course what happened in Poland with the sanctions and so on. So it's most flagrant in Bosnia-Herzegovina, obviously, but it is systematic for a certain trend of imposing these kind of truths in some form of post-democratic way. I mean, like in Germany. Remember, even in Germany when they had the election in one of their länder, and that the result of the local minister president didn't correspond to what Angela Merkel wanted, that she texted from South Africa, I think that these elections need to be repeated, so that the outcome was a result that she appreciated. So once again, it's most flagrant here, but it's something that people are starting to be accustomed with. Last example, what most French people still think about, there had been this referendum about the European Constitution in France, and most of the French people didn't want this constitution. The result was that basically the president of the moment, Chirac, said, well, okay, in that case we will just ignore that, we will pass it through our parliament and impose it anyway. So this is something that has led many French people to understand, even if there's a large majority for some or against something, it doesn't mean that it is imposed. And for the moment, you have in France a president whose acceptance rate is inexistent, who even at best at the first tour had something like, 15-17% of vote, and still who is directing the country. So this kind of erosion of democracy, of misuse of media, international institutions, the legal system in order to impose a political view that is not shared by the majority of the population is not new. It is a general trend that is not only due to the European institutions, but that you find even in the nation states. So once again, and we come back to the beginning of our talk, it's not so much a question of institutions than rather of elites, and it's not so much a battle about legal issues than rather about who controls finally the cultural politics. And that is why my appeal for years and years to conservatives has been that social and economic questions are important, but that the question of culture, of identity, of knowing who we are and what we want to do, and of influencing that in a positive way, I think, through conservative culture and politics is the most urgent need we have, not only in France or in Belgium, but also in Bosnia, also in Serbia, everywhere in Europe.
So in conclusion, you still believe in Europe as a community of different nations, but not as centralized as it is now?
I believe in Europe anyway. I am a European patriot. Some even say I'm some form of European nationalist, if that exists, because for me this is the most important field. I think that the nation-state identities can only be saved through a strong Europe, but this Europe needs once again to be turned upside down. For the moment, Europe, as we said, is centralized and becoming more and more authoritarian to the inside, but it is extremely weak on the outside. We need to turn it upside down. We would need a Europe that would be very free and subsidiary on the inside. It would leave the nation states basically alone to do whatever they do best, but that is able also to defend the interest of Europe in the world and to be sure that we can evolve in a peaceful way. And just one example, if we do not manage to assure that all Europeans get their same access to things like rare earth coming from China, if Europe doesn't manage that, then it's gone anyway. Then no national independence or sovereigntism will represent anything for you, because China has anyway the foot or the thumb on what you need to survive, and assuring that you get what you need petrol, raw earth, whatever is needed for the survival of our civilization. That is something that Serbia cannot do, that even France or Germany cannot do on their own, but something that a pressure by Europe could do. But for that we need to totally reform Europe, of course, and that is basically why I wrote that book, in order to show that such a reform is possible and that there is a way in between nationalist sovereigntism and globalized Euro-federalism, but there is a way in between.
We sure hope that there is time to do that. Mr. Engels, thank you for your time.
So, thank you very much.
Poštovani gledalci, gost radio televizije Republike Srpske bio je David Engels. Hvala vam za pažnju, ostanite uz naš program.